All right, 10 minutes after 11 o'clock. Thank you for tuning in this Friday morning. A couple of weeks ago, we were pleased to find out that you and I, Robin, were going to be featured in a local magazine. And so they gave us this questionnaire to fill out, and one of the things was, what are you passionate about? And so let me find what I wrote. This is what I wrote, I'm passionate about truth, fairness, sincerity, authenticity, and genuineness. That is exactly what I wrote. And
That's
then
you.
And human harmony, also creativity, arts, the music, and pizza. I did mention pizza. If I didn't mention pizza, then I wouldn't have been authentic, because the truth is I'm kind of passionate about pizza. But it is authenticity that I truly, truly admire when somebody can be themselves. Well, one of the things about this business is, and I've had people tell me that I'm acting. And I say, no, I'm not acting. If I were trying to act, you would know it, because it would sound horrible. I really am not. This is as me as I get. The only difference is, in real life, I might have a curse word or two, and I just avoid that. In real life, too, but especially on radio. I said a curse word or two, not a lot. I'm not a big cursor. Mm-hmm. Just once in a while. You know, when you can't get the lug nut off of the car,
That's tough.
Then the lug nut gets the names.
Yeah.
Dr. Debra Meehl is on the phone. She has written a book called Joyful Transformation. I want to make sure I get the cover of the book on the podcast in just a second. The subtitle of the book is 22 Keys to Reclaiming Your Authenticity.
I love that.
And guess what? When you do, it is like this weight is off your shoulders when you can be who you are. And I'm hoping she agrees with me. Dr. Debra Meehl, what an honor. Good morning. How are you?
I'm well, thank you, and thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Where are you calling from?
Texas. We are an hour south of Houston.
Oh, my.
Did you grow up in Texas?
I did not. I grew up in Oregon.
In Oregon. So it's two different cultures, isn't it?
Oh, boy.
So do you feel, because I did the same thing. I moved from New York to Florida, and there was a little bit of a culture thing, but I thought, you know what, I'm still going to be me.
Absolutely. One of the things that I heard a lot, probably in the first 2 or 3 years, was people would say to me, "You're not from around here, are you?"
and that's not such a bad thing, right?
It wasn't a bad thing. I would just smile, and I would say, "No, actually, I'm not." So, it's one of those things where you can take that as a positive, or you can take that as a negative.
And it's not necessarily that you're different. It's just that maybe you think differently, or your culture is different. Maybe your accent is different. But that's probably the least of things to be concerned about, is your accent.
Right. I think culturally it is remarkably different. I came here with kind of a Pollyannish attitude coming from the north. And, there's still a lot of segregation here in the South, and I was very unprepared for that.
And so how did you come to the thoughts that ended up in the book, Joyful Transformation?
One of the things that in dealing with a lot of my clients is that I hear all the time that change is hard. There's no scientific evidence that change is actually hard. What it is change is inconvenient for us. And so what I wanted to convey with the book is that there is a way to step into change and a step into making changes in your life, and that, again, it can be joyfully transformative.
So if you're transforming and you're remaining authentic, that's a good thing. But if you're transforming and you're no longer authentic, how do you know when you're actually putting on an act?
Well, I think that you become mindfully aware. Most of us are raised in a particular culture and in a particular environment, and what happens is that we lose that somewhere around grade school, high school. We try to fit in, and that's where we become inauthentic. And so we then have a lot of unhappiness in our lives. We marry who our parents want us to marry or who our culture wants us to marry.
Right.
We take jobs that are not us. We do a lot of different things trying to find the fit. And so in all of those things that we are doing, lots of times we become very unhappy. And then we live in a culture that says, well, there's a certain pill for that. And what I say is there's not a certain pill if you're in the wrong job or you're in the wrong marriage. There's not a pill that fixes that. What fixes that is, again, living your joy, living your authenticity, living who it is that you specifically are supposed to be. And that's where the joy is.
Does that unhappiness sometimes manifest itself into feeling guilty?
Oh, absolutely. One of the things I talk about in the book is brain fog, fear, obligation, and guilt. And fear, obligation, and guilt are probably one of the primary causes for a lot of people, again, not stepping into their own authenticity because they don't want to hurt anybody's feelings, and Mom wanted me to be a nurse, or, I wanted to be a particular something. And then if I don't achieve that, again, culturally or within my own self, then I become guilty, shameful, that kind of thing. Yeah?
And I think if what you're saying is taught to us as children, when we're very, very young, we recognize that you can be yourself, but you have to also allow your next door neighbor to be himself or herself. I think if we were to learn that early on, rather than, sometimes in human history we've been taught we're right and that guy across the street is wrong.
Right.
And not because they're doing anything wrong, but because they have a different religion or they're a different color. And I think if we were to accept that we're okay and they're okay, and I know it sounds Pollyanna-ish, I think if that's the right word, I guess. But I don't know. I agree with what you're saying.
Tolerance is something, again, that we teach, and we're taught, hopefully, as children. Not everybody has a lot of tolerance, but tolerance is one of the keys. And being able to recognize, I grew up, and as a small child, learning, red and yellow, black and white, they are precious in His sight. Jesus loves the little children of the world. Mm-hmm. It's interesting that as adults, then, we seem to get away from that. And we no longer embrace that particular theory of looking at the goodness within everyone.
And then you address that feeling of helplessness, because when you're a little child, you have to depend on other people in your life for everything. And then you have the children that are abused, so they sort of retreat back into their personality and they invent a new one for fear that abuse is going to happen again.
Right, and so that's living from your story. All of us, at least a great deal of us, come from not ideal childhoods. I personally believe that, we are born into families where we're to learn the most, and we can continue with that particular idea and that particular story of how things were, or we can change it. So the difference between reality is reality actually takes up time and space. So if I am at a particular event and things happen, that event is happening in reality. When I leave that particular event or that situation and I begin talking about it, I then, again, because of my culture and my gender and who I am, I began telling the story of that particular event with a certain flavor to it. And what happens is lots of times we get locked into our stories and we're then unable to move forward. So a lot of us come from distressing childhood, and as adults, we can then make a new choice. As children, it's difficult to make a choice.
Yeah.
But as adults, we can make a new choice.
Do you know if you are? I'm 62, just so you know. And if I look at old pictures of myself when I looked a lot better, I say, oh my gosh, I looked so good back then. But if I really think about who I was, maybe I looked better. But I think inwardly I am more happy now, and I think a lot of that has to do with accepting who I am and allowing the authentic me to allowing me to be okay with the authentic me. How about I just put it that way?
Absolutely.
Let's see. I need to take a little break, and we'll continue on the other side of the break. Dr. Debra Meehl is on the phone. She's an interdenominational pastoral counselor with a doctorate of divinity. She's an educator, the founder of the Meehl Foundation. She works with clients around the world to help them overcome trauma, dogma, irrational beliefs. Oh my gosh, we have so many of those around, don't we? The book is called Joyful Transformation, 22 Keys to Reclaiming Your Authenticity. We'll continue our conversation on the other side.
The weather is brought to you by myfwc.com. Safe boating is no accident. On this Friday, times of clouds and sun Warm but humid with a shower or thunderstorm in the area, high 85 to 89. Friday night will be mostly cloudy and sticky with a shower or thunderstorm mainly near the coast, low 74 to 78. For Saturday, some sun followed by clouds and quite humid with some showers and a thunderstorm likely mainly during the afternoon hours, high 86 to 90. From the Florida Weather Center, I'm meteorologist Joe Lundberg.
Ocala Eye is the largest, most experienced eye care center in North Central Florida. Tuesday at 10:30, Zora Harrison and Adam Tenza will be our guests, bringing us up to date on the latest optical and other innovations in the industry. For over 40 years, Ocala Eye has provided comprehensive medical and surgical eye care. But that's just the beginning. Just wait until you hear all of the exciting things coming our way. So be sure to listen Tuesday at 10:30 with Ocala Eye, helping you live life to the fullest.
All right, thank you. Short little break right there. Dr. Debra Meehl on the phone. I did find the book that we're talking about on Amazon. The cover of the book is now on the podcast that we're putting up there on the internet, and obviously you can buy the book on Amazon. Dr. Meehl, before we talk more about the book, is there a website that you've dedicated to your work or to the book?
Yes, it's www.meehl, M-E-E-H-L, foundation.org.
Okay, Meehl, M-E-E-H-L, meehlfoundation.org. If you had, this is going to be like a Barbara Walters kind of a question, but I mean, if you had a megaphone, I've often thought about this. Let me just kind of set this up. If I had a megaphone that could talk to the whole world, and I would take that megaphone and say, would you just knock it off? You got a lot of good people on here, and you know I'm talking to you. And all these world leaders that are the troublemaker world leaders, and I'm not singling anybody out. I think the average person who lives within the countries are good, just wanting to work, just wanting to provide for their family. It's the troubles in this world start at the top, I think. What would you say if you had that megaphone? What would you say to the world?
Again, hope and change are absolutely inevitable, and they go side by side. And that when we choose to make change, especially on a world platform, that we do that by considering everybody's position. And not everybody's position is correct, by the way. I tell people that your perception lots of times becomes your belief, and it's not necessarily true. So you can feel like the moon's made out of green cheese, but there's no fact in that. Mm-hmm. So again, when we look at the way that we think, and we take everybody's opinion, which lots of times is not fact,
right,
to consideration, that again, it takes a process of wise mind, which is using the logical part of our brain plus the emotional part of our brain to come to a conclusion. And what gets in the way most of the time is our ego. And our ego actually has three legs. It's power and control, security and survival, and esteem and affirmation. So if I am a world leader and I need to feel esteem and affirmation all of the time, I default back to that because that's part of my story, is that you have to like me and love me and, honor me and all of those things. And so what happens then is that I then begin making decisions based upon whether or not I'm liked or whether or not you particularly like me. And that's unfortunate because then that means that I'm not taking into consideration the situation. I'm only focused on myself.
Is that why some people continually to feel sorry for themselves, and then that way when they're around other people, they'll have those people gravitate toward them and say, oh, it's not so bad, let me help you out?
Right. We have that kind of victim mentality lots of times because it's reinforced on us, and nobody has pointed out that we don't have to continue retelling our story over and over and again. So what happens is that because a lot of us are compassionate, we hear somebody and we hear a tragedy or a particular event, and it's not to say that there's not a grieving process to any event or tragedy there is. But what happens is when we become locked into that, then another person and another person and another person begins to tell us how terrible it was and how awful it was, and then we become actually set in our story, and it's then difficult for us to move forward out of it.
I was wondering if you could comment on the influences that we have culturally that may have led us down the wrong path, and at the risk of maybe you not agreeing, I'm going to say that I've often thought that the contributions of Hugh Hefner, who just passed away, and I'm not picking on him necessarily as much as what he did. And what he did was he made young men, and I was one of them, feel that there was a certain standard that women must have. And so it changes your thoughts on who these little girls in your classroom are, and you grow up to realize that was all a big lie. And why are we honoring this guy? Why does he live in a mansion? And so I don't know if we had a playmate on one time, and she apparently was friends with him, and she didn't like my feelings about what his philosophy was, and that's really what I'm talking about, and mostly how it affected the rest of us.
His philosophy, the United States was actually founded on Puritan and puritanical principles. And so what happens is that, again, when a society gets locked into a particular way, there's usually a rebel somewhere in the midst that wants to break out of that mold. And so my observation is that Hugh Hefner kind of broke out of that mold and swung, obviously, very far to the left. The interesting thing about that is that he took a particular philosophy and an attitude and a belief system, and again, other people were influenced by that. And they were influenced by that, again, by gender and by culture and by numerous of other things. One of the things that, the magazine started out, obviously, with a lot of photos, and then, there was this shift into this editorial part of the magazine also, because as he changed and evolved, the magazine changed and evolved some. So we can take a look at that as an example of shifts that can be made, negative or positive, within our culture. And again, we have to be mindful and aware of choices that come to us and how we want to embrace those.
And you yourself have had to have choices because you were affected by Hurricane Harvey, and you could have chosen to feel sorry for yourself and say, "Oh, woe is me," but you didn't. You did just the opposite.
Well, right. We were very, very lucky. We evacuated our house and our clients and went to San Antonio, actually, for a week. My husband actually stayed behind. But a lot of our friends and our neighbors were, in fact, affected. A mile down the road from me, there was people that had 6 feet of, standing water in their homes. The gentleman that come and landscape for me lost both of their homes. There's been a lot of devastation in the area, and again, we've tried to be supportive to those people that have had that devastation.
I think you are giving us something that we can all sit back and rethink maybe some of the thoughts we've had about our own lives and about maybe in a bigger picture our social world, our cultural world. The book is Joyful Transformation. I wish we had more time to talk. 22 Keys to Reclaiming Your Authenticity. Again, I found it on Amazon. It's got great reviews. Dr. Meehl's website is meehlfoundation.org, and she spells her last name Meehl, meehlfoundation.org. Doctor, thank you for being on the air with us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
And stay safe. I didn't realize how close until Robin started talking about that. You said south of Houston. It didn't even sink in until Robin asked about that.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. All right, we will be right back.
The very best in quality is Captain T's Upholstery.
Hey, this is Dan. Let me ask you a few questions. Does your boat look better with the cover on? Has your car's interior seen its better days? Stop using a towel to cover up those rips in the golf cart. Isn't it about time you had it restored to better than new with a custom upholstery from Captain T? Captain T's Upholstery has been right here in Ocala for nearly 20 years, so they know how to make your ride one of a kind. Whether you want to take that classic ride back to a factory look or put your favorite sports team front and center, Captain T's Upholstery is who to call. 352-369-1810. That's 352-369-1810. Or stop by their location, 5030 South Pine Avenue in Ocala, just past the drive-in. And of course, don't forget to visit them on the web, CaptainTUpholstery.com.
The very best in quality is Captain T's Upholstery.
This is James Snyder, inviting you to join me each Sunday morning at 9:30 for Sunday Joy on 1370.